Welcome to Chapter 6, Creating a Website in Dreamweaver. If you're ready to get your work on the web, you're in the right place. Adobe Dreamweaver is the industry-leading software that allows you to create engaging websites without completely working in the code. In this chapter, we'll get acquainted with Dreamweaver, and I'll also teach you about cascading style sheets, also known as CSS. It may seem a little overwhelming at first, but by the end of this chapter, you will be able to understand and create web pages, style and test them, and even get introduced to designing for mobile devices. Let's get started. In this lesson, we are going to get familiar with Dreamweaver, the tools, and the interface. If you'd like to follow along, you can do so by creating a blank document, and that's what I have here. If you could, go to the File menu and choose New. If you're on a Mac, a great shortcut is Command-N. On a PC, that would be Control-N. But for now, let's use the File menu, and let's create a blank HTML page, and then look right here at doc type. For the doc type, I would like you to choose HTML5, and then click Create. What you're going to see is a blank HTML page. Mine says Untitled 12, but it's likely that yours probably says Untitled 1 or Untitled 2. This is a blank HTML page that hasn't yet been saved. Well, let's take a look around. If your screen doesn't look like mine, what I'd like you to do is click this button right here called Split. I like to be in split mode most of the time because this allows us to see the HTML while we work in design mode. Our other options would be to work strictly in the code or to work in design. I prefer to work in split mode because I like to see the HTML and the code behind the scenes. Now you might be thinking, well, do I really need to know HTML because we know that Dreamweaver is a WYSIWYG authoring environment? Well, you don't really have to know it, but it's highly recommended. A couple of reasons for that. One is because it's a good idea to know what's going on in the background. Just about every time I work with Dreamweaver, I always have to get into the code to do some tweaking. Not only that, but you're also going to learn to write CSS styles. Now, the difference between HTML and CSS is this. HTML is for the content of your web pages, the content. So everything that you type here on the pages, let me just type some text. And I'm going to hit return or enter on the keyboard. And then look right here in the code. Dreamweaver just created the P tag when we hit return or enter. This is the content of your web page. Now, if I wanted this to be red or a certain style or a certain font, that's when I would use CSS. CSS is for the presentation. HTML for the content. CSS is for the presentation. We will be learning about CSS in upcoming lessons, so we won't focus on that a lot right now. But let's do this. Let's take a look at the rest of the Dreamweaver interface. Now, if you don't see these little tabs across the top, I would recommend that you get a window and then go down to Workspace Layout. And I'm in Classic mode. I like Classic mode because I like those little tabs across the top. There are a lot of other modes that you can be in as well, but I prefer Classic. And here's something else to remember. As you're working in Dreamweaver, sometimes your workspace can become quite messy. You can pull your panels around and kind of just get everything in a mess. And if you do that, a great shortcut is right here, and you can reset your classic workspace, and that will get everything all nice and organized again. All right, very nice. Well, a couple of other things before we go, and one of those things is right down here in the Properties panel. If you use any of the other Adobe applications like Photoshop or InDesign, you may be used to the control panel at the top. You know, in Photoshop there's a control panel, and based on which tool that you have selected and what you're trying to do, those choices change. Well, that's what the Properties panel does in Dreamweaver. Depending on what you have selected and what you're trying to do, the Properties panel is going to be context sensitive, and that means that it is going to show you things that you can do for your selected element. If I had an image here and the image was selected, the Properties panel would reflect things that we could do to an image. All right, and we will be here quite a lot. Two other panels besides the Properties that we're going to be in a lot is the CSS Styles panel and the Files panel. In our next lesson, we are actually going to create our first website. What we've done here is created a web page, but it really doesn't belong to a website. So if we save this, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because it doesn't really belong to a family or a website. To be effective with Dreamweaver, the first thing you need to do after you learn the interface, of course, is to create a website and then build your web pages. So be sure to join us in the next video where we learn to do just that.